Welcome everybody to the Glasgow pilgrimage of the Iona community. My name's Alison, and with other members of the Iona community over the last 20 years, I've been leading different groups of people on walks around the Glasgow story of what it means to live through the rule and the justice and peace commitment of the Iona community. Welcome to Governold Parish Church. There's been a site of worship here for hundreds of years, and archaeologists have found hogback stones which are markers, they think perhaps of sites of burial, but there are many different theories about what they are and what they were used for, just as there are about this space of enclosure round about the church. This is where the Iona community has its birth and its roots, here in the heart of Govan, here next to the Clyde and in the heart of what used to be slum housing within the Govan area. This is where George MacLeod had his ministry. This is where he also had his breakdown, had his moments of recognition that poverty calls us to a new way of life. This is the heart, the furnace, if you like, of where some of the story of the Iona community began.
Amen. 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 Amen.
The rule of the Iona community calls us to work for justice and peace, wholeness and reconciliation in our localities, society and the whole of creation. And as part of this, we have a commitment to justice, peace and the integrity of creation. And the first half of this commitment says that we believe that the gospel commands us to seek peace founded on justice, and that costly reconciliation is at the heart of the gospel. That work for justice, peace and an equitable society is a matter of extreme urgency. That God has given us partnership as stewards of creation, and that we have a responsibility to live in a right relationship with the whole of God's creation. That, handled with integrity, creation can provide for the needs of all, but not for the greed which leads to injustice and inequality and endangers life on earth. That everyone should have the quality and dignity of a full life that requires adequate physical, social and political opportunity without the oppression of poverty, injustice and fear. That social and political action leading to justice for all people and encouraged by prayer and discussion is vital work of the Church at all levels. And that the use or threatened use of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction is theologically and morally indefensible, and that opposition to their existence is an imperative of the Christian faith. As members of the Iona community, this is what we believe. So behind me in this building here is the Pierce Institute, and this again is one of the historic sites of the Iona community. It's where George MacLeod, the founder of the community, worked from, but it's also where for a long time the Iona community had its offices. Today it's home to refugee organisations and anti-poverty organisations. It's a place where some of the revitalisation of the Govan area has happened over decades. For families, for lonely folk, for the people of Govan, for the strangers of the world. Welcome. This incredible space might be empty and echoey now, but imagine it full of life, the life of the Daffodil Fair, which is a part of the history of the Iona community, a great gathering of people, or the ceilidhs and the celebrations we've had there, perhaps most recently the 75th anniversary of the Iona community, where members and friends gathered from all over the world to celebrate the story, to watch a play about George MacLeod, and to remember the roots of the community here in Govan and in the Pearce Institute and in the MacLeod Hall. Imagine all the debates that there have been at our annual general meetings, the weighty discussions and decisions that we've taken. This is a place of history.
He's got his camera on me.
You're going to get a million hits on YouTube. This is Govan Cross, the heart of the Govan community, a place of regeneration, recently relaid, stones laid out for us to think about the history of Govan, but also the present of Govan as a sign of life. And yet all around us are also the signs of structural violence, the signs of poverty, the signs of struggle, the pawnbrokers, the discount shops, the charity shops. Govan still a place that wrestles with the same structures of history and poverty that it has wrestled with for so many decades. Take us outside, O Christ, outside holiness, out to where soldiers curse and nations clash, at the crossroads of the world. As members and family groups, we will engage in forms of political witness and action, prayerfully and thoughtfully. This wonderful windy spot is down on the banks of the Clyde. But behind me is the Transport Museum. And this is a place to remember all the people who left Glasgow and emigrated around the world. Also a time to remember that Glasgow was the second city of the empire, that its wealth and the great buildings we see round about us are those which have profited particularly from slavery and the slave trade. And Glasgow is a city that's still struggling to come to terms with that gaping wound in its history. If you go to Jamaica and open the phone book, you will see that the names in that phone book are Scottish names. They're MacLeods, they're MacDonalds. If you look at the memorial to the children killed in the early part of the 21st century in the violence that struck Jamaica as part of the drug wars and in the ghettos, you will see that the names of the children who died are Scottish names. And that's because the slaves had to take the names of their slave owners. This is a place where we should come to repent of our place in those structures of violence and slavery, and to remember that slavery and those structures of slavery still exist in the world today. To remember the people who've arrived in Glasgow through the dispersal scheme of asylum seekers who arrived by being trafficked here and smuggled here, some seeking safety and some discovering the only way to seek safety from where they fled from was to come in slavery, sometimes indentured labour, sometimes through the sex trade, and to remember that we are part of a structure that binds that together. This is a place for us to watch the river and to remember the death and destruction it has brought and our place within that. Helen Stephen, a member of the Iona community and great peace campaigner, says this: undoubtedly, one of the lowest moments of my life was when HMS Vanguard, first of Britain's Trident submarines, arrived on the Clyde. Although we had known it was Welcome to the UK border. We've come to Cessnock, which is where many people have to come to report on a daily or weekly or monthly basis to say that they are still in the UK, and they come with pieces of paper to be stamped and have all their biometric data checked and then put in caged vans and taken to Dungavel Removal Centre. It's called Festival Court because the offices are built on the site of the Garden Festival, which happened in Glasgow around 20 years ago. It's a place where we can come and remember that God welcomes all. God welcomes all, strangers and friends. God's love is strong and it never ends. The gate at the end of the road has been the site of many a protest against the UK's unjust asylum laws, and also is a place surrounded by a forest of security cameras. It tells us something about the power of fear. Just round the corner from here is one of the most hopeful places for me in the whole of the city of Glasgow. It's a place where people have not been deterred by the unjust laws, but instead have created a place of welcome, a place of hospitality, and a place of resistance. The Unity Centre is like many of the small centres that stretch across Europe and across the United States and across Australia and across other places in the rich world, where we seek to offer welcome, sanctuary, refuge to those fleeing persecution. It's a place full of creativity, full of people who work with and alongside each other to learn about hospitality from each other. It's not a place of charity, of giving to or doing to those who might be in a less fortunate position than ourselves. It's a place of creating a new society, a new way of being together in this world. And here it is, just round the corner, a place of hope, so close to that place of fear. Just behind me is the charity shop Unity in the Community, and it's part of the work that the Unity Centre has been done in various ways over the years. They've had a bookshop called Nay Borders, they've had a bicycle repair shop and bicycle shop where asylum seekers have been able to pick up a bike so they can get around the city easily. But also there are certain mornings and afternoons when goods are free for asylum seekers. This is Nelson Mandela Place, and it's also the place where the South African government had its consulate, and the renaming meant that during the apartheid years letters had to be addressed to them at this address in Nelson Mandela Place. On the day Mandela died, it was absolutely packed with the people of Glasgow, remembering that Nelson Mandela was given the freedom of this city whilst he was still imprisoned. It's a place where we can remember the many different members of the Iona community who were part of that apartheid struggle. A litany of names, too wide and long to name here, but some great people, many living in exile and banned from entering South Africa during that time of struggle. And it's a time for us to remember other parts of the world that are bound by similar laws of restriction, of movement, and places where people attempt to free and look for a better life. We might remember particularly Israel-Palestine and the hope for justice in that place. Easier for us to feel that the work for justice and peace just evokes in us a sense of guilt and even weariness when we think about all that has happened and been done in the name of power and privilege. And yet opposite me here in the Wild Olive Cafe in the heart of the city, it says, "My grace is sufficient for you," and here is a place where we can just sit and relax and share tea and coffee and a bowl of soup and talk about the things that matter in our lives, and remember that these are the gathering places. This is how it always starts, around a table with friends. This is George Square.
Lay down your sword and shield. Lay your weapons down. Lay down your gun by the riverside. Be a little soggy, but we'll keep slugging. We'll soon be on dry ground. We're waist deep in the big muddy, and the big fool set the push on.
This is the poverty plaque, and for years people in Glasgow campaigned to have this laid to respect the rights of people who live in poverty, surrounded as we are by many rich and famous men and one queen. This was laid on October the 17th, 1999. People from all walks of life gathered here, united in their commitment. Whenever men and women are condemned to live in poverty, human rights are violated. To come together to ensure that these rights be respected is our solemn duty. So here on the ground is another tiny plaque in front of the cenotaph. This was laid in 1985, and it says, "This plaque was laid by the City of Glasgow District Council to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the loss of civilian lives caused by the dropping of the first atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima, 6th of August 1945, and Nagasaki, 9th of August 1945.
I belong to Glasgow, dear old Glasgow town. But there's something the matter with Glasgow, for it's going round and round. I'm only a common old working lad, as anyone can see. But when I get a couple of drinks on a Saturday, Glasgow belongs to me. I'm only a common old working lad.
This is Clyde Street, and behind me is a building built on what was Community House, which was a venture of the Iona community to bring its work to the heart of the city, a place where many different activities were run, a place where a shelter was offered, food and kitchens, a place which, yeah, blah. So one of the lovely things about doing the pilgrimage with groups is that everyone suddenly finds a connection to the space of their own, and they then start to tell their own stories and they all interconnect. And having been doing this for about 15 years now, I think every time I do the pilgrimage it gets another layer of stories put over it.
Number 2.
Number 2.
Yes. Well, we got a goose there. Right. Right. Oh, this looks nice. Right. Hello.
So this, after a long cold walk around Glasgow, is the space. This is the new space and the new home of the Iona community here in Glasgow.
I'd say it's a resource across, international boundaries for liturgies and religious services.
It was news to us that we actually used some of the Iona resources back in Mississippi at our campus ministry there. So
right, that's nice.
welcome you to this blessed, not only blessed building, blessed stage in which people will meet. Unless the Lord builds the house, unless the Lord guards the city, our help is in the name of the Lord. God of heaven and earth.
Save us from the time of trial.